It's the Grassland Restoration's fourth and final webinar for winter 2026. The title for today is The Conservation Value of Erosional Environments. And like Ross had said, I'm Lee Moltzen, and I'm a member of the steering committee with the GRF. And if this is not your first webinar, you have heard this spiel before, but in case you have not, and it's your first time, here we go. The Grassland Restorations Forum's mission is to provide a place for information sharing, tool development, research, and education to promote and support conservation and effective restoration of grassland ecosystems in Alberta. We began in 2006 as a collaboration between provincial agencies, ranchers, and conservation organizations, First Nations, industry, ecologists, and reclamation practitioners. So to support the goals of the GRF, we put on a few different events, one of which being these free webinars. We usually try to do 4 annually between January and April. We also offer a one-day classroom course for how to use the range plant community guides and recovery strategies for project and reclamation planning. These are available as PDFs on our website, as well as if you're at any of our events, you can purchase them as well. We just had that course on the 26th of March at the Glenbow Ranch Schoolhouse out by Cochrane. Our next kind of event that we're going to be hosting is our fall range health assessment training, which will be on September 10th. And that is, it's a 2-day event. Usually there's a classroom portion on the first day, and the second is more kind of putting the field skills to use. And this is at the Castles Community Hall out by Brooks, and then the field component is at Antelope Creek Ranch, which is nearby. We also have our perennial gathering, which we're kind of known for, the Fall Information Session, which is held in November of each year in Claresholm. When registrations and more details for this year are available, it'll be on our website. So to kind of summarize, we offer webinars, courses, presentations are recorded. We have the fall information session. So check out our website. If you haven't already, get on our mailing list and you'll be kept up to date. So with that, for today, we have Ross Adams is the guy behind the scenes that manages all the hosting and everything. So thank you, Ross. And just a reminder to keep your cameras and microphones off during the presentation. The presentation will be recorded and will be posted on our website after. So I would like to introduce John Acorn. He teaches in the Department of Renewable Resources at the University of Alberta, focusing on insect and bird ecology, paleontology, and science communication. He's been a lifelong naturalist and is best known for his television series, The Nature Net, which blends broad knowledge of animals with a flair for music and humor. And he's also author of 20-some books on natural history subjects and on dozens of research papers and articles. So John also enjoys and promotes a broad appreciation for the natural world around us. He's a recipient of the U of A's Distinguished Alumni Award, Entomological Foundation's Medal of Honor, the NSERC's Michael Smith Award for Science Promotion, and the Royal Society of Canada's McNeill Medal for Public Awareness of Science. And today he'll be sharing about the conservation value of erosional environments such as sand dunes, badlands, salt flats, etc. So we are very pleased to have him with us today. So thank you, John, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Lee, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to your group. I'm feeling like I should know more about this group already, and I'm a little bit embarrassed that I don't. So if I say things that sound a little clued out, that's because I'm living in a bit of a university bubble right now. But I do look forward to sharing what I assume is probably a fairly unique perspective here. And I assume that you're seeing my slides on the screen at this point?
Certainly can.
Okay, good. Yeah, so what possible, I guess the opening question is what possible conservation value could a place like this have? What could be worth protecting and what could possibly live there? And this has been a question of interest to me for a very long time. 40 years ago, I was doing my master's thesis research, and this was my home. I lived out on a group of sand dunes near the town of Empress, along the Alberta-Saskatchewan border north of Medicine Hat. I lived in the back of that Datsun truck, and the screen tent was my laboratory, and I was studying the beetles that lived especially on the open blowing sand dunes. And I loved it. It was wonderful. I really bonded with that landscape. And I'll just point out, with respect to sand dunes, they're patchy. They are what we often call ecological islands. And here are some of the more prominent dune fields in Western Canada. The sand, where did they come from? They came from sands that were generated by the processes at the end of the last ice age, the last glacial period, and various deltas and beaches and so on blew into open blowing dunes when the glaciers melted and were probably very extensive 9,000 years ago. And then they grew over with plants, and then they blew around, and then they grew over with plants, and then they blew around, and then they grew over with plants. And we are now in a period where they are generally growing over quite a bit. So here's this very retro looking illustration is from my old thesis, and there's an air photo of the dune field, and you can see those white spots there are the open blowing sand dunes, and I had names for them all. So that's Big Dune and Grassy Dune and Home Dune and River Dune and so on and so on. And I went back and looked at air photos beginning at looks like 38 there. Isn't that a great graph made with a dot matrix printer? You don't see that very often these days. And I was very, alarmed in 1984 to see how the amount of open blowing sand had decreased over the years. And the long and short of it is that this trend has continued. You might think that with climate warming, it would get hotter and drier, and we'd have more desertification, so to speak, on the sand dunes. But in fact, we're seeing stabilization all throughout dunes in Western Canada. It's actually a period in Earth history that is quite, it's good to be a plant. Let's put it that way. There are still some nice open air areas. I mean, I say nice because that for me is where the interest is in places like the Great Sand Hills of Saskatchewan. And that is one of the biggest dune fields anywhere in Western Canada. Really approached only by the Lake Athabasca sand dunes in northern Saskatchewan. Yeah, so there are places where there's open blowing sand, but for me, the interesting habitats are not so much where the sand is blowing around, where it's bare sand, but this dune margin habitat, and you can see here in the foreground, mostly sand, but with a few plants here and there, things like scurf pea and skeleton weed and so on and so forth. And this is a fascinating environment. Now, there are some vertebrates that are of conservation concern that live in these places. The Ord's kangaroo rat has received quite a bit of attention in both Alberta and Saskatchewan. Quite a bit of research done on this creature, and it does require maybe not, open blowing dunes the size of office buildings, but it at least needs some open sand and And the reason is really simple. Sand is easy to dig in, and lots of things live in sandy places because the substrate is good for burrowing. So you've also got things like clockwise here from the upper left, that's a 13-lined ground squirrel, and they are mostly found, not exclusively, but mostly found in sandy places. Then there's a Canadian toad, and then in the lower left the Great Plains toad, and again species that really do well in sandy places because they can get down deep into the ground for overwintering. And the Canadian toad especially had a huge population decline a few decades back. And it's very clear that the places that support Canadian toads now are places with deep sandy soil. And then the snake in my hand there is a young Western hognose snake, and that's another species that's associated with sand. You might think that there would be a lot of birds associated with sandy places, but actually not as many as you might anticipate. This is, of course, the sandhill crane, and yes, I've seen sandhill cranes on sandhills, but usually on migration. The sandhill cranes are generally breeding in sedge meadows up in the boreal forest and places like that. So that I won't say much more about the vertebrate situation, but I will say a little bit more about, well, maybe a lot more about the bugs. So you've got the open ground and digging predators. And when I say open ground predators, I usually mean visual predators, things like tiger beetles. The open sand is kind of a buffet. And if it's open and clear and you can see for quite a distance, then anything that looks like food, you can run over and eat it. And that's also true for the group at the bottom of the page there, the scavengers aided by wind drift. There's always, the whole reason you have sand dunes is because of a combination of not very many plants and the wind and the sand. So the dunes are blowing around. And that the wind also brings all sorts of organic matter, including living insects, but also plant debris and seeds and so on.
Savvy was going to
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry, there was someone speaking there.
Sorry, John.
I
Someone
don't think they
joined
were
with
speaking to
their
me.
mic on.
Yeah, okay.
I muted them.
Okay, thank you. And then you also have herbivorous insects that feed on sand-dwelling plants. Sorry, I don't have a picture of a reddy copper of my own, but a beautiful, beautiful butterfly. And the caterpillars are on sand dock, which is a plant that's very much associated with prairie sand dunes. You've got a tremendous variety of solitary bees and wasps. This digger wasp here is a parasite. It parasitizes and paralyzes caterpillars and then buries them in the ground. And there's just so many species in these places, and many of them are also flower visitors as adults, so they're pollinators. And people who study, native bees and other pollinators will tell you that the greatest diversity of these insects is in places with a lot of open ground and ground that's easy to dig into. You've got some endemic tiger beetle subspecies, and I'll talk about that in a moment here. You've got lots of other beetles that are restricted to sandy habitats, including scarab beetles. That's a specimen of a particularly robust digging scarab. And then you've got some interesting instances. I'm calling it widespread species that were formerly or elsewhere. They're now surviving on sand. So what I mean by that is especially ladybugs. So we've got this very common European ladybug, the seven-spotted ladybug, that was introduced into Western Canada accidentally about 40 years. Well, I shouldn't say accidentally. It was actually introduced for aphid control, and it does a pretty good job about 40 years ago. and we worried. One of my books is about ladybugs in Alberta, and there was a tremendous worry that two very closely related species might have gone extinct in Alberta, but it turns out that they survive. This is the transverse ladybug. It's got a little bit of hair stuck to it because ladybugs are always sticky. They eat aphids and they get sticky. Anyway, if you want to find a transverse ladybug now, you go to the tops of semi-open sand hills in the boreal forest, or you go to the pediment slopes in the Badlands. If you want to find a 9-spot ladybug, and these species have conservation status now, one of the best places is on the margins of sand dunes in the prairie. So this 9-spot ladybug is actually on a leaf of scurf pea and photographed in the Great Sandhills. So that's interesting. It's probably the case that these, you could call them hostile environments, I suppose. They are a little too hostile for the European introduced species, but the so-called native species are able to handle it there. So that's cool. The sand dunes, the Badlands, they become a refugium for some species that have been edged out, or perhaps even just eaten by the introduced species. There are other interesting. I gotta brag for a second here. There are interesting beetles associated with sand, and there's one named after me, Hypococcus acorni. Compared here, that the only illustration that's been published is that picture on the right, 131, which is just a wing cover, and it's obviously totally different from the beetle on the left, which is a related species. They're small black beetles, but it's kind of nice to have one in my honor, and they live in open sand, found in Western Canada and also in Colorado. There's some prominent sand dunes in Colorado. I was a little bit distressed when I found out what hypococcus means. It means lower than the poop. But that's because many times you'll find this genus of beetles under dried cow pies. It was apparently no comment on me as a namesake. Oh, and I wanted to share this quote from my old friend, the late Rob Ruffley, was a professor at University of Manitoba, and he was interested in the beetles that lived on the sandy Shiloh military base. So his quote is, "John, I find more of the rare beetles on the dunes in the Shiloh military range than outside of it, because the damn tanks are always blowing the place up." And there's a strong, I believe him, there's a strong relationship between extensive sand and military bases, because they're just not very good places for agriculture. And yes, the insects benefit from disturbance. The rare insects that I'm talking about are not found on the heavily vegetated, long time stabilized parts of the sand hills with the organic horizon forming in the soil. They're found on these mostly open, bare places. Now, my focus in this has been the tiger beetles, and I just totally love tiger beetles, and I think you can probably see why. They're super beautiful. Many of them are colorful. They have big eyes. They're active predators. They have huge jaws, and they're fascinating, from the point of view of a biologist, not to mention the fact that some of them have conservation status. I would say, in North America, at least, butterflies get most of the conservation attention for insects, but tiger beetles are right up there, along with some other groups like dragonflies and so on. This, by the way, is the festive tiger beetle, Cicindulus scutellaris. My friend Chris Fisher and I decided to call it festive because I had one alive in a terrarium at Christmas, and it reminded us of Christmas red and green. So anyway, that name has stuck, which is nice. So tiger beetles, again, they're using these sandy places because it's easy for them to find their food, because it's easy for them to dig. Here's a sandy tiger beetle. It's digging its overnight burrow. So every night they dig a short burrow, and they hide from predators in that burrow, and they emerge again the next day. And when you add up the numbers, the thousands of beetles on your average sand dune and the thousands of burrows that they dig on every warm night, they're moving a lot of the sand themselves. So they're participating in the maintenance of their own habitat, although they can't do it entirely. Tiger beetle larvae are in vertical burrows. This is one that built a burrow along the glass side of a terrarium, and the biology of tiger beetle larvae is fascinating in its own right. I'll just show you a picture of this. Is John Spence, who was my thesis supervisor back in the day, and this is a burrow of a tiger beetle larva that we took turns excavating with our fingers in the Shiloh dunes in Manitoba. So yes, well below the surface, there are not just plant roots. There's this whole interesting community of tiger beetle larvae and things like hister beetles digging through the sand, looking to eat the tiger beetle larvae, and so on and so forth. It's a fascinating world. So yes, this and I put on a green shirt just so that you wouldn't get the impression that I don't like plants. I like plants. I really like plants, but for the insects that I'm interested in, we got to have just the right amount of plants, which means not too many plants. And this is my idea of wonderful habitat with interesting plants and undoubtedly interesting insects. There's 7 species of tiger beetles that are strongly associated with sand dunes in Alberta. This one is probably very close to being extirpated in Alberta. In other words, locally extinct. This is the ghost tiger beetle, and it really needs those big open blowing dunes. If it survives at all, it's somewhere in the Suffield Military Reserve, and that's a place where I have not personally worked. So I don't think we'll have that one for very much longer. It is certainly doing well in the Great Sand Hills, though. Here's the one that's been of most interest to me in recent years. This is Cicindula formosa. It's officially called the big sand tiger beetle. And when I wrote a book about tiger beetles in Alberta, I called it the beautiful tiger beetle because that's a translation of the word formosa. But it's a very interesting beetle in the sense that this is what they look like in Alberta. So they're kind of red purple with these beautiful creamy white markings and some blue and green trim. And they're big beetles. The average beetle is about 2.5 millimeters long, and it's brown and featureless. This is a gigantic 15 millimeter long beetle with tremendous colors and so on. For many, many decades, entomologists have been kind of puzzled by how the big sand tiger beetles on the Empress sand dunes are so different from the same species just about, not too far away at all into Saskatchewan. This is what they look like in Saskatchewan. And in Saskatchewan, we call it the Gibson's big sand tiger beetle, and it is a threatened species under the COSEWIC legislation, which is part of the Species at Risk Act for the feds. And so this thing has received quite a bit of research attention, and I've been pleased to be part of a team looking at the variation in this species from a genetic standpoint. We started a couple of years ago by working with a wonderful student, Rowan French, here at the University of Alberta, who showed that even though these beetles in Saskatchewan look identical at first glance to the same species on the Maybell sand dunes in Colorado, they're actually quite different. So we were able to, and this is important for conservation, because if a species lives somewhere else, then it gets a different status than if it is entirely endemic. So the Gibson's big sand tiger beetle, we now know genetically is entirely a Saskatchewan species. But the surprising thing, I'm going to go back to the Alberta thing, is that genetically, at least in terms of the parts of the genome that we sequenced, they're extremely similar to the Alberta beetles. It may be a matter of only one gene, and it was one gene that we just didn't happen to get data for. That doesn't mean that they don't deserve recognition as, Gibson's big sand tiger beetle, Cicinella formosa gibsoni, but it does mean that we have a very interesting situation where the Saskatchewan beetles, the Alberta beetles, and the Montana beetles all form a nice little genetic cluster that's different from the beetles to the south in the US and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to show you results from that study because we're still trying to figure out what they mean. Doing this work with my colleague Felix Sperling on the left. He's a geneticist and a molecular taxonomist. And Wei-Han Lau has just finished his master's thesis doing the molecular work on this species. And he's now working for the federal government in Ottawa. So we're still figuring out exactly how to interpret this data, but it's looking really good. And we're also working with other conservation biologists. The fellow on the left in this picture is Aaron Bell, and he's been involved in the conservation of this species in Saskatchewan. That photo was taken at Douglas Provincial Park, where there are wonderful sand dunes as well. So anyway, stay tuned for that story because it's very, very interesting. And of course, we don't expect a lot of genetic difference, partly because these dunes are not that old. They've at the very maximum, these populations are probably 9,000 years old, which is not geologically terribly old. I'll just say a couple of words about badlands as well, because badlands are also erosional environments, right? Where you have the process of erosion is basically keeping the plants from stabilizing the ground, and we often think of badlands as equally unique environments to sand dunes, but the badlands don't really form ecological islands the same way because badlands stretch up and down the river valleys in little patches and make it a much more continuous habitat for the various species that live there. There is a trend, and this is anecdotal, but I think there is a trend toward our badlands becoming more vegetated, not less vegetated, at least in the northern badlands. By northern, I mean, around Drumheller. So we may be losing badland habitat as well, but yeah, there's conservation interest in the badlands as well. Nesting birds like this prairie falcon, they like to nest on cliffs, and the badlands are perfect nesting places for prairie falcons, for golden eagles, for ferruginous hawks. And I just threw this in because it's such a nice picture of a ferruginous hawk, and I love them. You'll see ferruginous hawks nesting in trees, like cottonwood trees and so on, or isolated ornamental trees on the prairie, but they also live and nest in the badlands. So there's a lot going on there. There are birds like the rock wren that according to its name, it likes rocky places. So that's a typical sighting of a rock wren up on the top of a eroding badland hill, giving forth with its song. And there are some interesting things there, though. 2 summers ago, I was down hiking in Dinosaur Provincial Park with my friend Brian, and we're talking. I just look over and I saw a jumping spider, so I took a picture of it, and I didn't think much else of it until that evening. I emailed it to a friend of mine. Wayne Madison is a jumping spider taxonomist well, he's recently retired at UBC. And I said, Wayne, I don't recognize this jumping spider. And he said, wow, that's incredible. That's like the first record of that genus for Canada, and it's undoubtedly an undescribed species. Did you collect a specimen? And I said, no, I didn't collect. I didn't have a collecting permit in a provincial park. So it's a mysterious, unknown species that that is out there somewhere, waiting for science to catch up with it. There are also lots and lots of interesting bee flies, the family Bombyliidae, and I just I put this slide in because I just shared my personal collection of bee flies. I don't know how big yours is. Mine fills one drawer, a museum drawer, and I shared them with a grad student who is a specialist on bee fly taxonomy, and he said, "Oh, you've got one species here that is the first record for Canada, and the only other records are in Baja in Mexico." So there's obviously quite a bit that we don't know about the insect fauna of the Badlands, and so that's, it's exciting. It's not like this is a done deal. I'll just finish by mentioning salt flats and saying that there are certainly insects, including especially beetles, that are tightly associated with salt flat, or, alkali flats, whatever you want to call them. I'm sure there's a proper term and I'm not getting it, so I apologize for that. But again, all I'm saying is there is value from a conservation point of view of these erosional habitats. I love a good, beautiful native prairie as much as the next guy, but don't forget these other places as well, even if they're not as friendly to plants as they could be. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. I'm not sure how my time is here, but I think I should also maybe stop sharing.
Doing just fine for time here. So, yeah, just go ahead and throw any questions you may have into the chat there, folks.
Okay, so
All right.
do you want to read? Do you want to read them out,
Oh,
Ross?
whichever you prefer there, sir.
All right. Well, since there's only one, I'll deal with it. Yeah. So the question, Diane, is any thoughts on why there seem to be less active dunes nowadays? Yes, and I should maybe have explained that a bit more. I used to think that that the most recent period of dune movement was the consequence of the Dust Bowl, that it was warm and dry and droughty during the Dust Bowl era in the late 20s and the early 1930s. But it turns out there was work done by the Geological Survey of Canada, and I think the guy's name was Steve Wolf. They did optical dating of sand. So a quartz sand grain absorbs light when it's exposed to the sun, and then it gets buried by the wind, and it gives off that energy one photon at a time. And if you take cores from sand dunes, you can tell when the sand dune was last moving. And it wasn't the Dust Bowl that got the dunes moving most recently. It was the cold drought of the Little Ice Age. So I think that contrary to what most people think is going to happen with climate warming, with the dunes, at least for the moment, it looks like they're going to be more hospitable to plants, and so we'll see less open blowing sand. I hope that answers the question. The question, do tiger beetles have the ability to disperse between islands? That appears to differ greatly between species. So that big sand tiger beetle is apparently terrible at getting from one place to another. The smaller sandy tiger beetle, as soon as you have, like someone creates a construction site and there's open sand, boom, next year you've got sandy tiger beetles. So I think it's different between the species. And then John had the same truck as me, 100 years. I missed that truck. I don't know about you, man, but I missed that truck. Do I feel that, and Adam, nice to see your name, Adam. Do you feel that Alberta erosional environments have adequate regulatory protection? Okay, I'm going to admit, I don't know. And that's part of my feeling being here with you folks today. I really should become more clued into that. I suspect the only regulatory protection that they might have would be through the Species at Risk Act and the so-called critical habitat for some of these species that I've been talking about. Okay, I'm glad you liked the photos, Ariel. And how many? Oh, and the question from Kristen: how many of these are protected in some fashion? Well, it depends on what you call protected, and I mean, is the military base protected? Yeah, it kind of is. In Alberta, that's the only set of sand dunes that I know of that have some sort of governmental protection. The rest of them are private land. In Saskatchewan, the Great Sandhills, it's an ecological reserve, but it's also managed in cooperation with a grazing association. So yeah, it's interesting question. And the climate change models, I think they, to me, the interesting question about the climate models is it's not just, of course, temperature, it's also precipitation and it's wind. So, all these factors are working together to either increase blowing sand or decrease blowing sand. And I don't know enough about it, but I know that it's complicated and that those factors are often not, terribly important for other sorts of conservation. And Ashley, thanks for the comment. Sierra, very interesting question. If we lost the erosional landscape, what would be the consequences for the surrounding landscape? I think the consequence, if it is a consequence in that, in the literal sense of a consequence, is overall reduction in biodiversity. And that is, to someone like me, that's important. There's value to biodiversity. And if it's biodiversity of little obscure beetles, well, maybe that's just, a sort of aesthetic value that I personally feel is real. In a smaller scale, though, I want to come back to the point that so many pollinating insects are ground nesting as part of their life cycle. So, there could be reduction in pollinators in general with fewer open areas. Yeah, and Brianna, nice to see your name as well. Yeah, the dry wetlands in certain parts of the province, but you dial it back 10 years and we had some unbelievable amounts of water on the prairies in some of these sandy places. So I don't know. There's also hydrology, groundwater hydrology happening here that I'm just not qualified to comment on. Is it? Oh, that's an interesting question, Carly, about bison and those of us interested in sand dunes have kind of debated this for a long time, like how important were bison wallows, and a related question, how important is fire? I've been sort of paying attention to wherever I see cattle wallowing in sandy places and wherever I've seen grass fires in sandy places, and they don't seem to have much effect. I think I think the important data is that geological survey data showing that the cold drought of the Little Ice Age was the thing that really got the dunes moving. Brad, the answer to your question is, my books are all out of print. I'm sorry, man. You got to find them at a used bookstore. Oh, and the question of how resilient the systems are once disturbed and could they recover naturally? That's the sort of thing that we're hoping to get at with this genetic work. What we're imagining is a sort of an island system where some of the islands shrink up and disappear, and some of the islands shrink, and then the population shrink, and then they expand, and you can kind of track some of that with population genetics. I think as long as the species don't go extinct everywhere, yes, once you get more islands in the system, you can get it is resilient. And I didn't mention all the dunes have different assemblages of insect species too. Solar and pipelines, good. I haven't noticed any effect of resource development on sand dune movement. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. And then I'm just looking at Zach's question here. Well, I'm just going to agree with you that I'm going to try to stay more connected to this society as well, or this group as well. Oh, yeah, okay. So Christine brings up a really interesting point. Man, you go into the US and there's this tremendous battle between off-road vehicle, especially sand buggy or dune buggy people and dirt bike people and the conservationists, and to the extent where some protected areas, I'm thinking about the coral pink sand dunes in Utah, like half the protected area is set aside for biodiversity and the other half is a free-for-all for the vehicles. I just really hope that we don't get into that situation here, but I think my suspicion is that the private landowners and the leaseholders for the grazing, they don't want the off-highway vehicles any more than I do. So and then Marshall asked if I spent time in Wainwright dunes. Yes, absolutely. And in the Wainwright dunes, even though there's not open blowing sand, there are really interesting, especially moths that are feeding on sand associated plants. That's a wonderful area. Yeah, Rick, I must admit I haven't spent a lot of time in the Porcupine Hills, but yeah, I think oftentimes these eroded spots are pockets for rare species. In Europe, there's quite an interesting literature building up about biodiversity conservation in old gravel pits, and don't reclaim the gravel pit, just let it be a gravel pit. Yeah. Katie asked if tiger beetles are predated by vertebrates. Yes, especially if you go to the south, you find a negative relationship between the number of lizards and the number of tiger beetles. So luckily we don't have sand dune lizards in Canada. Some birds will eat tiger beetles, but they're kind of hard to catch. Their main predators are things like robber flies and other tiger beetles. Bigger tiger beetles eat little tiger beetles. The question from Jade is about. Oh, I just lost my place in the. Are there codependent plants and insects that are at risk? There's not the kind of tight codependence that yuccas and yucca moths. I mean, that's another, prairie story that's very tightly co-evolved and codependent. But, certainly something like that butterfly I showed you, the ruddy copper, the caterpillars need the sand dock plant. I don't think they're on other dock species, but they might be. So there are some of these relationships, yes. And and the Gibbons Badlands Prairie. Oh, yeah, I know Jen's question. I don't know of any insect or bird surveys for that area. That, maybe Jen, if you got in touch with the Alberta Lepidopterists Guild, that would be an interesting place to survey for rare moths, especially. Okay, and then Sierra's question, in the genetic patterns, is there strong genetic differentiation between sites like island evolution on land? Not the answer there, at least for the big sand tiger beetle, is no. We see regional patterns of clustering of the genetic data, but not dune by dune patterns. And that may just be, again, that these pockets are relatively geologically new. Like 10,000 years is not much. But good question. Yeah. And and Zach has a question about the hognose snakes and the rattlesnakes. Good question. Certainly, I've been interested in that Empress sand dune area since the 1970s, and I've seen the rattlesnake numbers kind of boom and bust. I think, and I don't know, I'm making things up here, but my anecdotal impression is that rattlesnake numbers seem to follow pocket gopher numbers, and pocket gophers do very well in the sands. So, so there's that. I think the hognose snakes are more tightly associated with sand than the rattlesnakes. The rattlesnakes do perfectly well in badland type habitats, but usually in the badlands nearest the river. So, in the more vegetated areas, and you occasionally find them up along the prairie rim and through the badlands itself. But yeah, I mean, it's also, when you have open ground, you have warm ground, and reptiles are at the northern edge of their ranges here in Alberta, so they are reliant on warm open ground in order to maintain their body temperatures. Okay, I'm catching up here. Have I been to the sand hills near Fort Vermilion? Only once, and yes, interesting place. Yeah, I'll just say I agree. I found some neat robber flies up there. And and then Scott's question. You've got these potentially temporary riparian erosional habitats, and the Athabasca River sand dunes between Hinton and Jasper. Yeah, absolutely. And one great example. Well, I'll give you two great examples. No, I'll give you the one good one because we're running out of time. There's a beetle. It's a little ground beetle called Bembidion lachnophoroides, and it was thought to be extinct until someone found some on a sandbar in the Pembina River. And a colleague and I, most summers we'll spend at least a little bit of time looking for that beetle, and somehow, I don't know how it does this, but somehow it finds these temporary, well-sorted sandbars in medium-sized rivers, and that's where the populations build up. And then that sandbar is swept away by the current or covered up or flooded, and they disappear. And I have no idea how that species persists under the radar between the times that we find it. But we honestly thought it was extinct. How to incorporate an active dune with reclamation? Well, you're not going to like this answer. In the, and I'm trying to remember which, it might be Idaho, one of the U.S. Western U.S. states. There's an endangered tiger beetle, and they act to perpetuate the habitat of the tiger beetle. They actually went at the habitat with broad spectrum herbicides. That makes me kind of uncomfortable, but that's what they did. It's not that easy to encourage sand dune movement, without just being kind of blunt force about it and bringing in heavy equipment. I know they did a very small amount of that on the Suffield base to promote kangaroo rat habitat, but it was like the size of my desk sort of thing that they had permission for. Yeah, and leafy spurge. Yeah, interesting plant. There's a beautiful moth that's been introduced to control leafy spurge, and it doesn't control it. It just really enjoys the fact that there's so much leafy spurge. Daniel's question: how deep is the sand portion of the dunes, and what's the deepest we've seen living? Well, okay, my answer about the deepest is sort of depends on the length of my arms. So I'm going to say I've personally seen a lot of things down to a meter, but there are records in the literature of at least tiger beetle larvae going down 2 meters, and I'm sure that there are deeper bits than that. The at least in the Alberta grasslands, the sand is coming from a geological formation called the Empress Formation, and so there's poorly consolidated sandstone that then is eroded into the sand, and then the sand is blowing around on top of this bedrock geology. So it's kind of a complicated question, but the answer is it can be very, very deep, and who knows what's way, way down there.
Well, thanks, John. This has been really fascinating, and I dare say this could go on probably for a lot of the rest of the afternoon, but we are coming up on the hour here, so I think I'll just say thanks again for your time and your wisdom, and I'll hand it back to Lee for the just the final comments.
Thank you. My pleasure. Yes, thank you, John. Yeah, very, very interesting too. The recording from this webinar, it'll be up on our website soon. As well as just a reminder, if you are interested in that range health training, I believe you can register for that already. That's on the website. Keep your eyes out for the fall information session that's coming up in November. As well, we do our best to kind of put on our workshops, webinars with keeping costs as affordable as possible through volunteers and sponsorship and all that kind of stuff. So if you did feel inclined, we do accept donations to the GRF. I believe there is a note put further up in the chat through we have a link through Canada Helps. So if you would like to do that, we'd thank you for that. As well, we do have kind of swag and our other publications that are available to order if you want hard copies. We do try to bring those along with us to the various events that we have a booth at or we're participating in. So if you are interested in some of the stuff that we have on the website, like hoodies, t-shirts, the flash drives, other publications, we will have a booth at the Alberta Native Plant Council Workshop, which is May 2nd in Calgary. as well as we will have a booth at the Prairie Conservation and Endangered Species Conference in Saskatoon, which is May 5th to 7th. So those are the next things we'll be at. So check out the GRF booth. So with that, I guess we can call it close for today. Thanks again, John.